The first time I saw the cabin, it was half buried in snow, nearly invisible behind a line of ancient pine trees. The roof sagged in places, the porch rail hung by a single nail, and ivy had claimed most of the stone chimney. Most folks would have seen it and turned around, but I didn't. I saw peace. Not for me, not entirely, but for my son, Caleb. He had just returned from deployment. 26 years old, 2 tours overseas, and more scars than he'd ever speak about. He used to smile with his whole face when he was a boy. But when I picked him up at the airport, his eyes didn't match his mouth anymore. The kind of haunted stillness I'd seen before in men I once escorted out of federal holding facilities, or safe houses years ago, when my badge felt heavier on my chest. Caleb didn't talk much about what happened. That's his story to tell. But I knew enough. He needed somewhere the world couldn't reach him. Somewhere without crowds, without noise, without constant reminders of what he'd seen and done. The cabin came up in a conversation with a sheriff buddy, an old ranger station untouched for 2 decades, tucked at the edge of a subdivision that grew up around it but never claimed it. Technically, just outside HOA jurisdiction. The plot was state surveyed long ago, and grandfathered in, surrounded on 3 sides by HOA-controlled land, but never part of it. So I bought it, cash, restored it board by board, not because I had to, but because the work kept me grounded, and I wanted Caleb to know this place wasn't a handout. It was ours, the two of us. He moved in first. I gave him space, came by every week or two with tools, groceries, or just to sit on the porch in silence. Some days we'd talk. Some days we'd fish the creek out back. Most days we just existed quietly, without pressure. And slowly, the stillness inside him began to shift. He fixed the roof by himself, sanded the floor until the old cedar planks shone like amber, started keeping a small journal, something he'd never done before. He even rescued a stray mutt, a wiry-haired shepherd mix he named Ranger, who followed him everywhere like a shadow. I watched my son come back to life on that land. But peace, I've learned, has a short shelf life in places where power gets petty. It started small. A bright orange note stapled to a tree near the gravel drive. Unauthorized use of HOA private road, cease immediately. Then came the knocks, HOA volunteers claiming to conduct routine compliance checks, asking to inspect occupancy. One woman, clipboard in hand, had the nerve to demand Caleb provide rental documents. He calmly explained he lived there full-time, owned it, showed them the deed which clearly stated the land was outside HOA regulation. They left, but not before muttering something about reviewing community standards. I wasn't worried. Not yet. Most HOAs bluff. And Caleb, though quiet, was fully capable of holding his ground when he felt safe. But then came her. Karen. I didn't know her name at first. Caleb just called her the clipboard woman. Tall, thin, always dressed like she was on her way to a board meeting, even in the middle of summer. She'd park her shiny black SUV across from the cabin entrance and just sit there, watching. Then came the first confrontation Caleb called me after it happened. She walked up and asked me what I was doing there. You told her you lived there, right? I asked. I did. She said, that's impossible. This area's not zoned for single-tenant residential. I gritted my teeth. She's wrong, and she knows it. He sighed. She said she was head of the HOA enforcement board and I was trespassing. That was when the shift happened. Caleb sounded shaken, and I didn't like that. I told him I'd handle it, that I'd come by next weekend. He told me not to worry. I can manage it, Dad. But I could hear the tension in his voice. I didn't push him, but I started preparing. I reviewed every document I had, deed zoning maps, historical land surveys, exemption notices. I printed copies, laminated some, just in case, because I'd dealt with people like Karen before in courtrooms on raids and hearings. People who wrap themselves in rules they invent, thinking the louder they speak, the more true it becomes. People like her don't care what's right, only what feels like control. Weeks passed. Caleb said she came back 3 times. each time more aggressive, demanding forms, threatening fines, claiming she had community backing. One afternoon, she even took photos of Ranger and accused Caleb of harboring a dangerous animal. That's when I knew she was escalating. Caleb didn't fight back. He just tried to stay under the radar. But peace isn't always the answer when the other side doesn't want it. And one night, late October fog thick over the ridgeline, my phone rang. It was Caleb. He sounded panicked. There's a paper nailed to the front door. It says I have 24 hours to vacate. I sat up straight. What kind of paper? Eviction notice. With HOA letterhead. My blood ran cold. Take a picture. Do not remove it. I'm on my way. I didn't grab a uniform. I didn't grab a warrant pad. I grabbed the badge I kept in my glove box and I drove. Because someone had just declared war on my son's peace. And she had no idea who she was messing with. By the time I reached the cabin, the fog had thickened to a cold wall of white, and the winding road up the ridge shimmered under my headlights like a silver ribbon. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled in my truck, easing to a stop beside Caleb's. Ranger barked once, then quieted when he saw it was me. Caleb was already waiting on the porch, standing stiff as a fence post in his hoodie and jeans. The eviction notice still nailed to the door beside him. His eyes met mine, and even in the low porch light I could see the storm behind them. I didn't touch it, he said. Like you asked. I nodded. Good. Let me see. I stepped up and read it slowly. The header looked official. Ash Hollow Community Preservation Authority. Below it the words, unauthorized occupancy, notice of violation and summary eviction. No legal citations, no stamp, no county signature, no municipal codes. Just Karen's name printed at the bottom, followed by a title she clearly made up. Lead Compliance Officer, HOA Enforcement Committee. This is worthless, I muttered. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. She's been back 3 times this week, Dad. She waits until I leave for groceries. I came home today and she was on the porch with another guy, some dude with a clipboard taking pictures of the property. Said I had structural additions that needed to be approved. Structural additions? I laughed dryly. The rain gutter you fixed, he nodded, and the bird feeder. I clenched my jaw. My badge wasn't visible, still tucked in the side pocket of my truck. But my instincts, honed by years of dealing with this exact brand of arrogance, were now on full alert. She wasn't just posturing anymore. Karen had declared a crusade, and Caleb, with his quiet recovery and honest ownership, had become her target. The next morning, I didn't leave. I pulled out a folding chair, placed it right at the edge of the porch, poured a cup of black coffee, and waited. Sure enough, at 9:13 a.m. sharp, the black SUV rolled up. Karen. She parked sideways across the private drive, a calculated move to block anyone from leaving, and stepped out dressed like she was about to testify before Congress. Pencil skirt, blazer, heels too sharp for gravel. And of course her clipboard. She didn't see me at first. Her eyes were on Caleb, who stood by the woodpile stacking logs. Mr. Reynolds, she called out. You are now in active violation of Section 14C of the Ash Hollow HOA Residential Code. We've received 3 separate complaints this week. Caleb didn't look at her. This property isn't part of the HOA. She strode up anyway. That's debatable, she snapped. Your land may have been excluded by some outdated boundary line, but it directly affects the surrounding community. Visual integrity, access continuity. Of shared amenities, your cabin sets a precedent that invites chaos. I stood. Chaos, I said calmly. She blinked, finally seeing me. Her gaze traveled from my boots to my face, registering unfamiliarity. Her grip on the clipboard tightened. And you are. I walked down the steps slowly. The owner of this land. Father of the man you've been harassing. She tilted her chin upward. Sir, I am acting on behalf of the HOA. We have the right to enforce community standards. Not here, you don't. We've consulted legal counsel. We believe there's precedent for annexation under shared access agreements. Good, I said. Because I'd love to see that in writing. She faltered for half a second. There's no need to get hostile, she added quickly. We're trying to maintain a safe and orderly environment. Your son's presence has raised concerns. My tone dropped. What kind of concerns? She glanced back toward the SUV. His temperament. The dog. The equipment. This cabin looks like it's under construction without permits. We've had children walking nearby. No children walk past this cabin, I interrupted. This is private land surrounded by barbed fencing, with a single access road that you're currently blocking. She shifted, clearly not used to being challenged. I'll be filing this violation, she said, holding out the clipboard, as if that would magically grant her authority. I suggest you file it with someone who cares, I replied, stepping closer. Because what you're doing here, it's trespassing, harassment, an impersonation of legal authority. Karen's eyes flared. Excuse me. I took a deep breath. Not yet. Not today. I didn't show the badge. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed her to keep going. I needed her to show her full hand. People like Karen don't stop when you show them facts. They stop when they're publicly, legally, unmistakably wrong. Leave, I said quietly. Before you make this worse. She stood still for a long second. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a snarl. This isn't over, she muttered. I'm escalating this. And with that, she turned, stomped back to her SUV, and peeled away tires, spitting gravel in a tantrum of defeat. Caleb stood beside me, now silent. You okay? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, you... I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Let her escalate, I'll be ready. Because this wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was about principle, and Karen had no idea just how deep she'd wandered into the wrong territory. The air that week was thick with tension. Caleb tried to keep calm, but I could see the unease crawling back into his shoulders, the kind he carried after deployments. When every knock on a door felt like a threat, and every stare from a stranger felt like a loaded question. Karen didn't return the next day or the day after that, but we both knew she would. And when she did, I wasn't there. It was a Thursday morning. I had driven into town to pick up a replacement valve for the water heater and a week's worth of supplies. Caleb stayed behind to finish sanding the porch railing. At exactly 10:34 a.m., Karen showed up again, this time with backup. 2 men in dark polo shirts, one of them holding what looked like a laminated enforcement badge that could have been printed at any office depot. They pulled up in tandem behind her SUV and walked straight toward the cabin like they owned it. Caleb was alone. No cameras. No recording. Just him, Ranger, and the weight of everything we'd worked to protect. He told me later, much later, that he almost didn't open the door. But something in him refused to hide. So he stepped out onto the porch, calm as ever, arms folded across his chest. Karen wasted no time. We've returned under Section 8A to demand immediate proof of occupancy authorization, she barked, as if reading from a poorly memorized script. Failure to comply may result in civil penalties and removal from premises. Caleb looked her in the eye. This is private land. She ignored him and pointed toward the 2 men. These officers are here to observe and document your non-compliance. One of the men cleared his throat. We're part of the Ash Hollow Property Enforcement Corps. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Never heard of that. It's a subdivision of the HOA's Special Board Committee. The man replied, suddenly sounding unsure. Caleb held up a folder. This is a copy of the deed. The land is legally exempt from your HOA. The house is fully permitted by the county, and your presence here is unlawful. Karen stepped closer, jaw clenched. You don't get to dictate what's lawful, young man. I'm not, Caleb said softly. The state of Colorado is, she faltered. Then her voice sharpened. Look, I understand that you think this is all just some misunderstanding, but you're putting everyone around you at risk. There are families here, children. This structure is unsightly. Your dog barks constantly. Ranger barks when someone's on the property, Caleb replied. Which he's doing now, because you're trespassing. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that comes just before a threat. "This is your last warning," she said. "We can make things very difficult if you don't comply." Caleb took a breath. He could have shouted, could have lost his temper, but he didn't. He simply stepped back, placed the folder gently on a small table near the door, and said, "You're making a mistake." That's when she snapped. Karen snatched the folder, flipped it open, and according to Caleb, pretended to read it, scoffing the whole time. "This proves nothing. These documents could be fake. We'll be back with official orders." She turned sharply, her heels crunching across the gravel, as she waved her officers to follow her back to the cars. But not before she left a small blue paper taped to the mailbox. "Final notice of removal. 48 hours to comply. No signature, no seal, no legal weight, but enough to shake anyone who didn't know better." When I returned that evening, Caleb handed me the notice without a word. I read it, folded it, and lit it on fire in the fire pit out back. "I tried reasoning with her," he said quietly. "I was calm. I gave her everything. But it didn't matter." I nodded slowly. "It never does with people like her. They don't want resolution, they want submission." I paused, but that ends now, because reasoning had failed, and it was time Karen learned what happens when you push the wrong man too far. The next morning, I drove straight to the county registrar's office in Clearview, Colorado. I wanted confirmation, not just for our own peace of mind, but for evidence ironclad official stamped with the full weight of the law. Because Karen had crossed a line now, one that wasn't just annoying or aggressive, but criminal. Impersonating an eviction officer, posting fraudulent notices, bringing in fake enforcement agents. It wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was a legal offense. At the county office, I pulled every relevant document. The deed, the zoning maps, the boundary overlays for Ash Hollow's jurisdiction. The exemption clause that clearly stated this parcel was never included in the HOA charter. A legal oversight on their part, perhaps, but one that gave us complete independence. I made 6 certified copies. 1 for me, 1 for Caleb, 4 for what was coming next. When I returned to the cabin, Caleb was waiting with tight shoulders and a hollow look. "They came back," he said simply. I froze when, about an hour ago, same 2 guys. Karen stayed in the car this time. He handed me a photo from his phone. Another blue notice taped directly to the cabin door, this time bigger than before, with bold, black letters. "Final eviction order. Vacate within 24 hours. I studied it. Fake code. False authority. No legal identification number. No witness. No date of issue. A complete fabrication. They said they'd be back with a tow truck," Caleb added, "to remove my truck and the generator." That was it. I pulled the badge from my glove box and clipped it to my belt. "Not this time," I said. I called a lawyer I trusted, an old contact from the Department of Justice, who now ran a small firm specializing in property rights. She told me what I already suspected: Karen's actions weren't just illegal. They could carry serious civil and even criminal consequences under Colorado law. Harassment, fraud, trespassing, threat of unlawful eviction, impersonation of a legal officer. I had everything I needed, and I wasn't going to let it go. But I also knew Karen. I'd met her kind behind desks and in boardrooms, seen their smirks in court, when they thought no one could touch them. She wouldn't stop until she felt the full weight of the law breathing down her neck. So I set the trap. I called in a favor from the local sheriff, a friend who owed me for a few quiet favors over the years, and asked him to stop by the cabin the next time Karen showed up. Not to arrest her, not yet. Just to be present, official, unmistakable. Meanwhile, I made sure the entire property was covered by motion-triggered cameras. I mounted a sign at the end of the drive. Private property. HOA. Has no jurisdiction. Filming in progress. Then I waited. It didn't take long. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, they came back right around 8:00 a.m. The usual SUV, the same 2 fake officers, and this time, a flatbed tow truck rolling slowly behind them. Caleb was on the porch. I was waiting in the driveway. Karen got out with a folder in hand, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf, like she was attending some kind of resistance protest. "You've had your warning," she announced. "We're removing the unauthorized vehicle and equipment now." The tow truck driver, a young guy clearly confused, looked at me and then at Caleb. "I was told this was an abandoned vehicle." "It's registered to me," Caleb replied. "And it's on private land." The driver blinked. "Wait, is this not HOA property?" "No," I said, stepping forward. "This land is legally outside of HOA control, and this notice I pulled the last fake document from the door is an unlawful attempt to evict a legal resident from their home." Karen scoffed. "We're within our rights to maintain neighborhood standards." "You're within nothing," I snapped. Then I turned to the tow truck driver. "If you hook that vehicle, I will consider it theft, and I am prepared to file charges." Karen laughed. "You can't file anything. You're not law enforcement." That's when I pulled back my jacket and revealed the badge on my belt. "Actually," I said, voice low and cold, "I'm a U.S. Marshal." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. The fake officers stepped back instinctively, unsure whether to run or salute. And just as the color drained from Karen's face, a sheriff's patrol car rolled around the bend and came to a gentle stop right behind the tow truck. The deputy stepped out, slowly tipped his hat, and said, "Ma'am, you're going to need to come with me." Karen froze. I was just enforcing community guidelines," she stammered. "Not on land you don't control," the deputy replied. He gestured toward the fake notice. "That's fraud. You've impersonated legal authority. You've threatened illegal eviction. You're lucky he's not pressing federal charges." Karen's hands trembled as she fumbled for words. I didn't mean to." "You meant to intimidate?" I said flatly. "And you picked the wrong family to try it on." She didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. The deputy didn't arrest her, but he did escort her away. The fake officers left quietly behind her eyes on the gravel. The tow truck turned around and disappeared without a word. Caleb and I stood in the silence that followed Ranger sitting at his feet, like a silent witness. He looked at me. "You didn't have to do all that," he murmured. I smiled. "You're my son." That was reason enough. I drove through the night. The winding road to the forest edge of Ash Hollow had never felt longer. But tonight, I wasn't counting miles or watching the clock. I kept seeing the message from my son, short, sharp, and enough to punch a hole in my chest. "Dad, something's wrong. I don't know what to do." Karen came again. Karen. A name I'd come to know too well. But my son, a decorated veteran who had faced some of the darkest corners of the world, was texting me in the middle of the night, his voice trembling in the voicemail because of a woman who claimed authority in a neighborhood association. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I arrived at the cabin around 3 a.m. The porch light was still on, but it no longer looked peaceful. Caleb sat on the steps, shoulders hunched. Ranger curled beside him, alert and tense, like he was waiting for something to break. I didn't wear my uniform, didn't flash a badge. I came as a father. Nothing more, nothing less. "You okay?" I asked quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He nodded, eyes red from lack of sleep. "She came by 3 times. Last time she taped an eviction notice to the door. Completely fake. No seal, no citation. Just her name." I didn't say much. I just sat with him, watching. And as the sky began to lighten sometime around 6:45 a.m., a silver SUV turned onto the gravel drive. The same license plate, the same stiff posture. Karen, she stepped out like she was headed to a boardroom, dressed crisp. A folder clutched in her hands. She didn't see me. I stood in the shadows near the porch corner, just out of view in the pale morning light. Caleb stepped forward to meet her. Calm. But I saw the exhaustion beneath his composure. "I've already told you," Caleb said, voice steady. "You don't have jurisdiction here." Karen raised her eyebrows, unimpressed. "I have a responsibility to ensure this community's safety. Someone reported an unregistered male living here. This cabin isn't listed as a residence in the HOA records. My fists clenched, but I held still. Watching. Listening. I have full ownership papers verified by the county, Caleb replied. You're harassing me, Karen scoffed. Harassment. I'm doing my job. She took a step closer, self-righteousness thick in her voice, and pulled out a fresh piece of paper. She reached toward the cabin door, likely ready to post another fraudulent warning. I stepped out of the shadows. What exactly do you think you're doing? I said evenly. Karen froze. She turned, startled by my voice. She looked at me, a stranger in her eyes. I'm enforcing HOA policy, she said stiffly. There are clear rules here. Are you law enforcement? I asked, calm but direct. County official zoning officer. She hesitated. You're printing fake notices and stepping onto private property without consent. I continued. That's not policy. That's trespassing. Possibly fraud. Her smile faltered just slightly. I don't know who you think you are, but you have no authority to interfere. I tilted my head slightly. Good. Then carry on. I'm just visiting my son, seeing how the locals treat him. Her eyes narrowed. Your son. I didn't answer. I just stood there, silent, steady. And that's when Karen stepped back, ever so slightly. Maybe it was my posture. Maybe it was the way Caleb didn't flinch, even after days of being hounded. Maybe it was the fact that for the first time she wasn't sure who was watching. Karen didn't say another word. She turned and walked away, the red paper still clutched in her hand. I watched her leave, still silent, because sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to assert power. You just need to stand there and let the truth speak for itself. The next morning, I stood at the window of the cabin, a mug of coffee in hand, watching mist lift off the treetops. The air was still almost peaceful, but I knew better. It was the kind of calm that came just before a storm. Caleb hadn't said much since Karen's last visit. He moved quietly, methodically, as if trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy in a place that no longer felt entirely his. Ranger stayed close to him, never more than a few steps away. I'd planned to let things lie for a day, give everyone space to breathe. Karen had other plans. At precisely 8:17 a.m., her SUV pulled up again. But this time she wasn't alone. Two men stepped out behind her. They wore black tactical vests, not police-issued, but custom-made, stitched with bold white letters. HOA Enforcement Unit. One carried a clipboard, the other a camera slung around his neck. It was theater, but dangerous theater. Karen walked up to the porch like she owned the dirt beneath her feet. She didn't see me standing just inside the doorway, just out of view. This time, I let the camera roll from the start, silently recording from the corner shelf lens, angled just right. Caleb stepped out to meet them again, jaw clenched. I told you yesterday, he said, voice low. You are not allowed on this property. Karen didn't flinch. This is an HOA matter now. You've failed to comply with 3 prior warnings. We're initiating compliance protocol per Section 5.3 of the Visual Integrity Guidelines. Visual integrity. Caleb echoed, incredulous. This is my home. The man with the clipboard chimed in. We need to document the premises. Interior and exterior photos per Karen's request. Caleb took a step forward. You take one more step and you're trespassing. Karen raised a hand, signaling the man with the camera to start filming. We're within our rights. This land affects community standards, and we have received complaints. From who Caleb demanded. From multiple residents, she said, eyes flicking nervously, because she didn't have names. Only herself. That's when I stepped outside. Karen froze mid-sentence. She recognized me now. Not as a father, not as a quiet bystander, but as something else. Something official. I didn't say a word. Just stepped between her and my son. Slowly. Calmly. She shifted on her heels. This is a civil inspection. You're interfering with an authorized procedure. No, I said, holding up my phone, the recording still active. You're conducting an unauthorized raid on private property. She swallowed hard. Then she turned to the camera guy. "Turn that off." He looked confused. "But you said—" "I said turn it off," she snapped. Caleb didn't say a word. Ranger growled low in his throat. I took a step forward. "Leave now." Karen stood her ground for a second too long, that fatal pause, when someone realizes they've overplayed their hand. "You'll be hearing from our legal team," she hissed. "I'm counting on it," I replied, "because now I've got everything I need on video with witnesses, including a fake enforcement unit impersonating legal authority." The man with the clipboard turned pale. "Wait, we're not impersonating—" "You wore a vest with enforcement unit on it and tried to enter someone's home without cause," I said, voice cold. "That's not HOA policy. That's grounds for criminal investigation." Karen's face flushed, then drained of color. She turned sharply, marching back to her SUV without another word. The two men followed, one muttering about not signing up for this. They left. We stood there, Caleb and I, the morning quiet again, but changed. I recorded everything I said. I figured he murmured, exhaling. I handed him the phone. "And I'll be filing it with the county, the sheriff's office, and the state's housing commission." "Thanks for coming," he said after a moment, voice quiet. "You didn't have to say it," I replied. "I never left, because that's what fathers do. We don't always wear the badge, but when someone crosses the line, especially with our children, we step in." And this time Karen had crossed more than just a line. She'd kicked open a door she couldn't close. The clip I recorded that morning was short, just under 4 minutes. But it carried more weight than Karen or her self-appointed enforcers could ever imagine. I uploaded it to a secure cloud folder labeled "Everything Properly" and sent it directly to the county sheriff, a friend from my early days on the force. I also looped in the Colorado Housing Commission and a contact from the Attorney General's office. I didn't need a press conference or a public showdown. I just needed to let the truth speak. But I still hadn't shown my hand to Karen, not officially. That opportunity came 2 days later. Karen returned this time alone, but she looked different, colder, more calculated. She parked farther from the cabin, stood at the edge of the gravel drive, as if trying to decide whether it was worth stepping onto the land again. She held a thick manila envelope under her arm, likely another collection of fake warnings or newly invented infractions. I stepped out from the porch wearing a plain green flannel and jeans. I walked slowly, deliberately, until I stood about 15 feet from her. She didn't speak first, so I did. Back again, I asked, tone calm, steady. Karen lifted her chin. "I have documents that confirm this property falls under HOA visual compliance jurisdiction. You've been notified repeatedly. Failure to respond constitutes willful violation." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Just stop." Her mouth opened slightly, but I didn't let her continue. "You've harassed my son, trespassed, fabricated notices, lied about enforcement authority. You even impersonated legal officers using fake vests and equipment. All of it is documented." Her face turned red, but her words came slower now. "I was following policy." "No," I interrupted. "You were following ego." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. Not a weapon, not a threat, just identification. I flipped it open. The gold badge of a U.S. Marshal caught the morning sun. Karen's face went white. "Let me be very clear with you," I said, holding her gaze. "I have not once identified myself until now. I've let you show me exactly who you are when you thought no one was watching." She blinked fast. I didn't know." "No, you didn't," I said. "But ignorance is not a defense." I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice. "This is not just a family's property. It's not just a cabin. This land is registered under federal veteran reintegration grants, part of a pilot program for supporting disabled servicemen returning home. You haven't just harassed a homeowner. You've interfered with a federally protected site." Karen's hands trembled slightly as she tried to keep her composure. "I had no idea this was—" "You never asked," I said. "You assumed. You judged. You abused what little power you thought you had. She stepped back. Are you going to arrest me? I shook my head. No, not yet. Her breath caught. I'm giving you a chance, I continued, to walk away, to withdraw every single complaint you've filed, to issue a formal written apology, not to me, to my son. She hesitated. If I don't, she asked, voice barely audible, then I forward everything I said to the sheriff, to the state, to the Department of Justice. And I personally file charges under 18 U.S. Code Bear 242 deprivation of rights under color of law. She stared at the badge again as if hoping it would vanish. It didn't. Karen swallowed, then nodded stiffly. I'll take care of it. You have 48 hours, I said. After that, we stopped talking. She turned and walked back to her SUV. No smugness, no hair flip, no parting words. Just the quiet realization that she'd messed with the wrong man. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just tucked the badge back into my pocket and walked back toward the cabin where Caleb was waiting on the porch, arms folded, watching everything. You didn't have to do that, he said softly. Yes, I replied, I did, because I may have taken the badge off years ago, but I never stopped being what it stood for. 2 days passed and Karen didn't show. No SUV in the distance. No hollow threats taped to the door. No faux compliance teams prowling the woods with clipboards and vests stitched by ego. Just silence. At first, Caleb and I allowed ourselves to breathe again. I split firewood while he worked on restoring the old fishing dock. Ranger lay in the grass tail, thumping lazily, with every soft gust of mountain air. For a while it felt like life was returning to what it was supposed to be, quiet, healing human. But that illusion shattered on the morning of the third day. A letter arrived. It was hand-delivered in a black envelope stamped with a gold seal, and left neatly in our mailbox by someone who clearly wanted to avoid being seen. The letterhead read, Ash Hollow Community Association, Executive Committee. I opened it on the porch, Caleb watching silently beside me. The wording was formal, almost theatrical, the kind of bureaucratic script designed to sound reasonable, while seething with veiled control. We regret the misunderstanding and distress caused by recent enforcement actions. While the board was unaware of certain procedural missteps by one of our volunteers, we affirm our commitment to community integrity. Therefore, we respectfully request a private meeting to clarify boundaries and reach a mutual understanding. Signed, the Ash Hollow Executive Committee. I read it to twice, then laughed. Caleb didn't. Do they think this fixes it? He asked. No, I said. They think this avoids it, because that's how HOA boards often operate, through polite deflection. Written apologies without ownership, and meetings designed to dilute truth into compromise. But not this time. That afternoon I drafted a reply. It was concise, 1 page, no flowery language. I stated that we would not be attending any meetings until a formal investigation into Karen's conduct was initiated. I requested a complete list of HOA bylaws and enforcement protocols, along with video surveillance archives of her previous visits, assuming any existed, and I ended it with this. Should you choose to protect those who abuse their authority, rather than uphold the integrity you claim to defend, then I will have no choice but to escalate this matter beyond community borders. I signed it with my full name, and beneath it, Deputy U.S. Marshal Retwin. The next day I got a call. A man named Greg Haskins, vice chair of the HOA, wanted to speak. His voice shook just slightly when he introduced himself. I could tell he was trying to gauge what kind of man I was. Friendly, combative, dangerous. I let him wonder. We're reviewing everything internally, he said. Karen has voluntarily stepped back from enforcement activities while we, reassess roles and expectations. Has she issued an apology? She's working on a statement. That's not an apology. There was a pause, a long one. We'd also like to extend an invitation for your son to be exempted from property oversight For the duration of— No, I interrupted. You don't get to grant him what's already his by law. Another pause. Understood, he said quietly. And one more thing I added. I want a written retraction. Every violation, every notice, every digital trace your system logged against this cabin or my son's name. Remove it, publicly, or we go federal. The call ended politely, but firmly. By the end of the week, the HOA posted a bulletin on their official board, the one next to the clubhouse and tennis courts. Notice of correction. After a full review of recent enforcement actions, the HOA acknowledges that several notices were issued in error. These actions have been formally withdrawn and expunged from community records. We regret the oversight and affirm our commitment to respectful dialogue moving forward. No mention of Karen by name, no direct apology. But everyone in the neighborhood knew exactly what it meant. Word spread quickly. Caleb was stopped 3 times that week by neighbors, some apologizing, others quietly expressing their support. A few even came by to drop off food or firewood, small tokens of solidarity, in a place that once felt cold. Karen disappeared. She didn't show up to board meetings. Her SUV wasn't seen for weeks. Some said she took a personal retreat. Others said the board asked her to step back quietly to avoid scandal. I didn't care. What mattered was that the board blinked first. And Caleb. He smiled again. Real smiles. Not the kind people fake to survive, but the kind that crack through old armor. That was worth more than any lawsuit, because sometimes the biggest victory isn't what you force others to do. It's what you restore in the people you love. 2 weeks passed, and just like that, Karen became a ghost. No more surprise visits. No more printed threats. No more HOA enforcement unit traipsing through the woods like mall cops playing sheriff. The silence was almost suspicious. Then a message landed in my inbox. It wasn't from Karen. It wasn't even from Greg Haskins, the vice chair. It came from a communications officer on the HOA's legal team, a bland woman named Denise, who wrote like she was trying to defuse a bomb using corporate jargon. In accordance with recent events and upon advice from legal counsel, the Ash Hollow HOA has voted to restructure its compliance committee. Miss Karen M., last name redacted, has stepped down from all official duties effective immediately. While the HOA appreciates her years of volunteer service, we recognize the need for procedural clarity and respectful neighbor relations. No apology, no direct admission of wrongdoing, just a soft boot and a carefully worded goodbye. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 days later, Caleb and I were invited to a community picnic, the kind of event the HOA throws once a year, to remind people that it still cares. In the past, Caleb never attended. And if I'm being honest, I wouldn't have either. But this year, something was different. Neighbors stopped by the cabin that morning, some shy, some embarrassed, all bearing something a pie, a jar of honey, homemade salsa, small offerings, quiet confessions of who they'd believed and how that belief had started to fracture. I never really liked Karen, one woman admitted. But, well, she sounded so official all the time. You just assume someone's right when they sound like they know the rules. I nodded. That's how bullies keep their jobs. At the picnic, there were folding tables and paper lanterns, and a band that played 70s covers under an oak tree. It felt wholesome in a way I hadn't expected. Caleb stood near the grill helping flip burgers. Ranger wandered off leash with kids chasing him like a local legend. And that's when the microphone crackled to life. Greg Haskins took the stage, sweating slightly, holding a clipboard, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Thanks, everyone, for coming," he began. "Before we get to the raffle, I wanted to say a few words." He cleared his throat, looked down at his notes. "We've had some challenging moments lately, some missteps, some misunderstandings. But communities like people grow through those moments. We listen. We learn. We make changes. A few heads nodded, a few eyes rolled. I'd like to take a moment to recognize Caleb. He continued glancing toward my son, for his patience, his service, and his reminder to all of us that we are neighbors before anything else. Polite applause followed. Caleb blinked, clearly stunned. Greg continued, "We're grateful to have you here, and to your father as well for reminding us that authority only means something when it's used responsibly." He didn't say sorry, but the message was clear, a public nod, a careful reframing. The kind of apology that looks like accountability, at least from a distance. I didn't need more than that, because as I looked around the lawn, I saw more than folded chairs and BBQ smoke. I saw change. The neighbors now understood. The board had been humbled, and Karen, for all her self-appointed power, had vanished from the center of it all. Caleb turned to me and asked, "Do you think this will last?" "No," I said truthfully, "but it doesn't have to. Not forever." He tilted his head. "It just has to last long enough for people to remember what respect looks like," I said, "and what it feels like when someone finally stands up." That night, as we walked back to the cabin under a sky full of stars, Ranger trotting beside us, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Earned peace, because sometimes the best apology isn't a speech or a statement. It's what people do when they think you're not watching anymore. There's a moment every lawman faces sometime between their first day in the field and their last. A moment when the badge in your pocket becomes more than metal. It becomes weight. Responsibility doesn't end when you clock out. And as much as I tried to live a quiet life after retiring, tried to leave behind the late-night calls, the courtroom drama, the gray lines between justice and rules, the truth is you never really hang up the badge, especially when you're a father, especially when someone targets your child. I didn't confront Karen because I wanted revenge. I didn't show my badge to humiliate her. I did it because silence, when wielded by power, is dangerous. Karen didn't knock on my door with fists. She knocked with paper notices, policies, threats, wrapped in HOA letterhead. That's what makes people like her so insidious. They hide behind rules. They weaponize process. They treat authority like a crown instead of a duty. And my son, he didn't deserve that. No one who's been to war, who's carried trauma heavier than any backpack, should come home and be told they're unwelcome by someone who's never served a single soul outside a committee room. This cabin, this quiet place nestled between pines and lake mist, it was never about property. It was about healing, about giving my son a place to rebuild. And when someone tried to take that away because it didn't fit their vision of a community, I realized the badge doesn't belong in a drawer. It belongs in your choices, in how you stand between someone vulnerable and someone cruel. That's why I kept pushing. That's why I recorded. That's why I stayed quiet long enough for Karen to show everyone who she truly was without me saying a single word. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a badge can do is not demand attention. It can listen, it can wait, it can watch. And then when it's time, it can act with clarity, not anger. Caleb and I still live by the cabin. We rebuilt the porch last month. He's painting now landscapes mostly using light and water the way some folks use breath. Ranger's older, slower, but just as loyal. Neighbors still wave. Some stop to chat. Others nod and move on. But the air has shifted. People remember what happened, not because it was loud, but because it was just. And justice once shone in quiet ripples louder than any committee memo. So to anyone out there wondering if it's worth it, standing up to pettiness, to bureaucracy, to people who confuse control with leadership, let me say this: it is. It always is. Because you don't have to wear a uniform to protect someone. You don't have to flash a badge to do what's right. But if you've ever carried one even for a season, you know, you never really take it off. And if the day comes when someone tries to make your child feel small, tries to erase what they've fought to rebuild, you'll know exactly what to do. Badge or no badge, you'll stand. And that will be enough.